Almost nobody who has heard of Lolita has actually read it. That is not a snobbish complaint. It is a technical problem. Because the book has become, in most of the world, a shorthand for something Vladimir Nabokov did not write. The word Lolita, in ordinary speech, now refers to a certain kind of adolescent girl. There are Lolita fashion aesthetics. There are Lolita music videos. There are men on dating profiles who describe themselves as looking for a Lolita, and mean it as a compliment to themselves. All of this is drawn from a novel written in 1955 by a 56-year-old Russian émigré professor of comparative literature, in a small college town in upstate New York, at a rickety wooden desk in the passenger seat of a 1952 Oldsmobile, and every single one of the meanings the culture now attaches to the word is the opposite of what the book actually says. The claim I want to make today is that Lolita is not a romance. It is not even, in the literary sense, a transgressive novel. It is a horror novel that has been catastrophically misread for 70 years, and the misreading is not the reader's failure. It is the book's own warning about the mechanism by which the misreading happens. Let me explain what I mean. Lolita is narrated in the first person by a European academic in his late 30s who calls himself, in the book, Humbert Humbert. Humbert is on death row when he is writing his memoir. He has murdered another man. He is about to be tried. And he is writing what he calls his defense, his explanation of the events that led him to abduct a 12-year-old girl named Dolores Hayes, whom he calls, in his private lexicon, Lolita, and to travel with her across the United States for 18 months, subjecting her to what he describes in his own words as a series of sexual crimes. The book is beautifully written. That is the first fact. It is the most beautifully written first-person prose in 20th-century American fiction. The sentences shimmer. The vocabulary is precise. The wordplay is inexhaustible. Humbert Humbert is a superb prose stylist. He is also, in the plainest possible terms, a serial child rapist. Nabokov knew what he was doing. He was, by his own account in the postscript to the 1958 American edition, aware that he was creating a narrator who would seduce the reader into overlooking the crime by the sheer quality of the sentences. He said, in interview after interview, that he expected the reader to see through the seduction. He said the book was, in his phrase, a tender case history of a monster. Almost no reader saw through it. The book, from the moment of its first publication in Paris in 1955, was received as an erotic novel. In America, when Putnam brought it out in 1958, it topped the New York Times bestseller list for 6 months. Reviewers spoke of its tenderness, its passion, its controversial love story. Stanley Kubrick adapted it into a film in 1962, cast a beautiful 15-year-old actress in the title role, and shot the whole thing as a satirical comedy with James Mason as a rueful romantic anti-hero. Adrian Lyne remade it in 1997 and shot it as straight romance with an even younger-looking actress and a soft-focus soundtrack. The book had been captured by the very mechanism it was warning readers about. That mechanism is, in essence, prose. Or more precisely, the reader's tendency to identify with a first-person narrator whose voice is charming, whose vocabulary is rich, and whose self-descriptions are sympathetic. Nabokov was, in the 1950s, teaching literature at Cornell. His most famous lectures, collected after his death as lectures on literature, hammer this exact point. He tells his students, over and over, that a competent reader must resist the enchantment of the first-person voice. You must, he says, keep your eye on what the narrator actually does. Not what he says. What he does. If you keep your eye on what Humbert Humbert actually does, Lolita is not a difficult book. It is an unambiguously monstrous book. Humbert Humbert marries Charlotte Hayes because he wants access to her 12-year-old daughter. Charlotte dies in a road accident. Humbert takes Dolores from summer camp and tells her that her mother is only ill. He drives her 3,000 miles across the American continent. He checks her in and out of motels. He renames her. He controls what she reads, what she watches, what she wears. He beats her when she resists. When she tries to escape, he tracks her down. He does this for 18 months. She spends the entire time trying to survive him. When she finally escapes, she is 14 years old. She has a broken childhood, an unstable adulthood, a bad marriage, and she dies in childbirth at 17. The book, in its actual plot, is one long chronicle of the destruction of a child. Humbert Humbert, meanwhile, spends 400 pages telling us, in his beautiful prose, that he loved her. That is where Nabokov's warning kicks in. He is showing you a specific literary trick that abusers, con men, cult leaders, and totalitarian regimes have been running for centuries. Which is, I will describe my atrocity in the vocabulary of romance, and you will find it hard, because the vocabulary is beautiful, to see what I am actually doing. The vocabulary will do half the work of concealment for me. If I say I loved her often enough, and I say it with enough lyricism, the reader, including sometimes the victim herself, will begin to wonder whether love is not, in fact, what was happening. That, Nabokov is saying, is how it works. That is how a whole civilization full of educated readers can pick up a book called Lolita, close it 400 pages later, and remember it as a love story rather than as the chronicle of a child abduction. Because the reader was outsmarted by the sentences. Which is, of course, exactly what Dolores Hayes was. Now, I want to say something about the second-order damage. Because it is not just that the book was misread. It is that the misreading has, over 70 years, seeped into the culture and produced a set of terms that continue the crime. Consider the word Lolita as it is now used in ordinary English. The dictionary entry, in most current dictionaries, defines it as a sexually precocious young girl. The definition contains within it the assumption that the girl is the seductress. That the responsibility is hers. That Humbert Humbert's version of events, his claim that he was, in his phrase, seduced by a nymphette, is a description of reality. Dolores Hayes, in the book, has no chance of seducing anybody. She is a 12-year-old girl whose mother has just died. She has no other adult on earth. She is dependent on the man who has taken her. When she does try to flirt with Humbert Humbert, in one of the most heartbreaking scenes in the book, she is doing what a specific kind of abused child does, which is to try to get some measure of control over her abuser by playing the role he wants her to play. That is not seduction. It is survival behavior. Nabokov describes it, in the prose Humbert Humbert cannot control, in exactly those terms. He shows you the child's calculation. He shows you the tears at night. He shows you, in one especially awful line, the way Humbert Humbert hears her weeping in the next bed, night after night, and does nothing. But the culture picked up the word and gave it back to Humbert Humbert as a compliment. That is what Nabokov was warning about. Not just an individual crime. The absorption of the abuser's language into the culture's language. The way an atrocity can be re-narrated by the person who committed it, and if the re-narration is stylish enough, the culture will pick it up and pass it around and eventually forget who wrote it. This is not, incidentally, a purely 20th century concern. It is a warning that applies to nearly every situation in which a powerful party gets to describe what it did to a less powerful one. Read any political memoir written by a fallen dictator. Read the marketing copy of any tobacco company from the 1960s. Read the internal communications of any social platform that harvested the attention of children. In every case, the technique is the same. Beautiful vocabulary. Sympathetic first-person narration. Selective description of the atrocity. And a reader, or a whole society of readers, that finds it difficult to see the ugly plot through the elegant sentences. Nabokov built the whole book to inoculate his readers against exactly that mechanism. He believed literature at its best was a training in seeing through voice. He believed the first-person narrator is one of the most dangerous instruments in fiction, because it can smuggle almost anything past the reader's guard. And he believed the great test of a literary reader, the test he was giving his Cornell students, and the test he was giving the reader of Lolita, was whether you could remember, at the end of a beautifully written page, what the narrator had actually done. Most readers, 70 years later, are still failing that test. Which is the exact result Nabokov was afraid of. So the next time somebody tells you Lolita is a love story, tell them it is a hostage story that has been narrated by the hostage taker. And remind them that the hostage's name was Dolores. Not Lolita. She was named at birth by her mother, before Humbert Humbert ever met her, and she was called by that name until the day she died at 17. If this changed how you think about Lolita, subscribe. We break down the most important books ever written, one argument at a time. New video every week. And if this was worth 10 minutes of your life, hit like. It helps the channel more than you think.